Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
So I need to just double check something here. And Joseph, I'm going to rely on your expertise. And Eric, you can chime in on this as well. Both of you are uniquely qualified for answering this question. If somebody is serving in the military, how long do they have to serve before they can retire with their full pension?
At least 20 years.
At least 20 years. All right. Now, if while they are serving, they get married, but their spouse has not reached their 20-year mark, and then the one who has retires, does the spouse also get to retire and receive his or her pension? They would have to wait, right? They would have to continue to serve until they reach their full 20. Right? So just because one spouse retires doesn't mean the other gets to retire with their full pension unless they have served an equal number of years. Good. Bear that in mind for what I'm about to say. In this parasha of Mishpatim, we deal with, right off the bat, a topic that is extremely painful and extremely difficult to untangle. The mitzvah, the policy of servitude. Now, sometimes it is translated as slavery, sometimes it is translated as servitude, sometimes it is translated as serfdom, and honestly, it can be all three of those depending upon the different context in which the word occurs within the Tanakh.
Is it Ovad?
What?
It's Ovad?
Right, you are an oved, right? Okay. You are a servant, or you are a slave, or you are a serf. When we were in Egypt, you probably all remember the part of the Haggadah where we say, Avadim hayinu, hayinu. We were slaves in Egypt. We weren't servants in Egypt, right? We were not honored maids and butlers to Pharaoh. We were making the mud bricks, and we had little choice, and we were so much slaves that they felt they could kill our children with impunity. On the other hand, David is routinely called an Eved Adonai. He is a servant of God. Slave would feel like a really terrible English translation of that sentence. But now we see in Mishpatim something a little in between. Not merely the glorification of one's devotion, and certainly not chattel slavery as was experienced in Egypt, and even worse as was experienced in the Americas, but instead somebody who has indentured themselves. They have pre-sold their services, if you will, to someone else. And for the length of that contract, they are their eved, they are their servant. When it comes time to leave the service of their master, the person who prepaid for that service, well, there are a few stipulations. One, they are given a largesse, they are given a gift as they go that they should not leave empty-handed. And when they go, if anything that they brought with them, that they owned before they began their service, goes with them when they leave. However, anything they gained during their service remains, because it is the property, belongs to the person who they have been serving. Which leads me to the very sticky question. What happens if the person they were serving helped them find their spouse, and that spouse has not finished his or her term of service? Does that mean the person who is now being freed leaves their family behind? Indeed, the Torah says that is an option. But wait, I hear you saying, surely he would want to stay with his family and not leave them. And the Torah allows for that particular stipulation, but with a little wrinkle. If somebody who should be freed chooses to stay longer and serve all the way up until their jubilee or until their spouse is also freed, then the person that they are serving takes them by the ear to the doorpost, puts their earlobe against the doorpost, grabs a metal spike, and punches through the earlobe into the doorpost. There was some debate about exactly which doorpost this is, but we'll follow many of the commentators who say it's the doorpost of the house, thereby bloodying the doorpost with the blood of that person. I told you this was going to be difficult and icky to talk about. Good, I'm glad that you're uncomfortable in giving me those looks. But why? Well, I mean, is why the rigmarole? Why not just say, like the military, hey, if your spouse hasn't finished, why not stay a couple of years? Because you don't want him or her shipped off while you're retired. Stay in the biz for a little bit longer, and when you're both ready, then you can leave together. Okay, fine, they'll leave a little early, and then, maybe their pension is not as full, but it's at least you can stay together. Either way you choose, there wouldn't be anybody standing at the gate of the military base with the nail ready to poke a hole in your ear against that doorpost. I mean, I don't know what hazing goes on in the military. Maybe they would, but certainly it wouldn't be official military policy. Well, let's go back to that doorpost and what it symbolizes. Well, when we were in Egypt and we were getting ready to leave, and we had that little ceremony called the Passover Seder, what was one of the most iconic elements of the Seder that we no longer do?
Blood on the doorpost.
We put blood on the doorposts, right? This was a sign from the Passover sacrifice that we were prepared for the Exodus, that we were servants of God, and that God should not harm us because we were standing publicly and defiantly on God's side against the Egyptians. So what is this ear blood doing? Well, it is essentially saying, you have rejected the freedom that God gave you. God wants people to be free. That is the natural condition of humans. That is why God took us out of Egypt. That is how we can best serve God while we are free. Slaving away while also serving God is not the ideal at all. And if you have voluntarily chosen to extend the length of your servitude, then you are essentially replacing the sacrifice that was made in Egypt with your own choice, your own blood, and it is of inferior quality. You should be free. Yes, you are allowed to stay under these conditions because we are not going to forcibly separate the family. But it's the wrong choice, and that's being marked by having it publicly declared there at that doorpost, in contradiction to the doorposts of Egypt. Now, who wants to leave their family? Is it really the wrong choice to choose to stay and be a servant? Well, no. The ideal, of course, that the Torah would be proposing is that, yes, you should be free, and then you should work in order to free your family, to redeem them, which was a common practice. Whatever had been paid to hire their services in advance, you can compensate the person to whom they're currently working, and then they can go free as well. Redemption of a relative is a perfectly normal process in Judaism, because unfortunately, all of this legislation is built around one underlying problem, which was that in the ancient world, far beyond the borders of Israel and within it, this form of debt servitude was very, very commonplace because impoverishment and poverty and the inability to find a way to lift oneself up was far too commonplace. Flood comes by, wipes out your field. What are you going to do? Right, there was no one to give you a loan because everybody else was probably affected as well. And if your field was particularly hurt, you now had nothing to sow. You had nothing to reap. You had no way to feed yourself. How are you going to feed yourself? Well, you would hire on as a laborer for someone else. But for someone else, they didn't have ready cash to just hire you. All they could do would be to say, look, come work for me. I'll give you room and board if you give me your labor. And for this many years, we will work it out. And when you leave, I'll be able to give you something then. This was what this servitude was like. And it was an unfortunate but necessary component of the poverty legislation of the ancient world. But the Torah does not want us to fall into the trap of thinking that because it had been necessary, that it was the ideal, that this was good or this was right. It was allowed, but it was never celebrated. The ideal was to break slavery for all time, for all people, always. And when somebody chose to continue to perpetuate it, we consider that to be a stain not only against them, but also a stain against the household that forced someone to make that kind of decision. But remember, the person who owned the wife could have also said, I free her too. Manumission was perfectly within their right to simply liberate anyone else and not make someone choose between their own freedom and staying with their family. And so while their choice to stay a slave is a painful choice and one that the Torah does condemn, we also condemn the homeowner whose doorframe has now been marked by somebody's blood, that they force them into that continued servitude longer than was appropriate. Judaism continues throughout the rest of Torah and throughout the rest of our history to continue to put greater and greater support, to tighten the safety net tighter and tighter so that no one will ever be put in this position, and to ensure that we help each other without forcing such horrible decisions to need to be made. Judaism recognized that freedom is the essential state of all humanity. And no matter what happens, we must try to soften the blow. And we should never allow ourselves to deteriorate once again, to continue to make somebody make those choices, to put someone in a position against the doorframe, deciding whether they were out and free or whether they were in with their family but still a servant. That is not the choice that God wants us to make. God wants us to liberate ourselves and to liberate each other. This remnant, this vestigial mitzvah, is there as a reminder of the height that God wishes us to reach for when it comes to establishing freedom for ourselves and proclaiming it for one another. Shabbat Shalom.